Welcome to another episode on Day-to-Day Christians. We're working our way through Genesis, and at the moment we're in the stories surrounding Jacob, the son of Isaac. And today we're going to be ripping through a few chapters, trying to work our way speedily through Genesis. So if you're working with me, get your Bible out and whatever you're using to jot down notes, and let's get into it. Starting off, we're finishing up the end of chapter 30. At verse 25, we have Jacob asking Laban, the father of his two wives and the grandfather to all of his children, he asked him to allow him to leave to go back to the home of his people. Laban agreed to this and asked Jacob what would he like for his wages as his payment for his service for all the years he's been with Laban. So Jacob said to Laban that he wished to have every speckled and spotted sheep, every black lamb, and the speckled and spotted among the goats as his wages. And in verse 34, Laban said, "Good, let it be so as you have said," and then goes around kind of defying his agreement that he just made, where he goes off and gives all of the speckled and spotted animals that was supposed to be Jacob's wages to his sons, so that Jacob had nothing to take for his possessions, for his payment. Then from verse 37, we see Jacob doing something pretty clever in order to attain something for payment. It says here at verse 37, "Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks on the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. And because of this, Jacob was able to inherit a great wealth of animals and flocks as his possession for his wages." Now going into chapter 31, at the top we see and that we hear that Laban's sons and Laban himself were very unhappy that Jacob was tricking him and that there were so many striped, spotted and speckled animals for him to take away. So we see in verse 3, it says that the Lord said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers and your kindred, and I will be with you." So once talking and discussing these things with his wives, Jacob then decided to trick Laban again and not tell him that he was going to leave. And in verse 21 it says, "He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates." And of course, when Laban found out about this, he gathered up some men and pursued Jacob in search of him. And while looking for Jacob and his daughters, God came and actually warned Laban not to say anything good or bad to him, kind of giving him a general warning not to interfere, otherwise you'll kind of fear the wrath of God. But eventually Laban caught up to Jacob, who would be traveling much slower with women and children and with farm animals. And they ended up having a conversation. And this is what Laban said to him. "What have you done that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me, and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with myrrh and songs, with tambourine and lyre? It is in my power to do you harm." And Jacob answered Laban by saying that he was afraid that Laban would take away his daughters from him by force. And eventually, towards the end of the chapter, we have Laban wanting to make a covenant with Jacob to kind of make peace between the two of them. So Jacob took a stone and started making a pillar and commanded his men to bring other stones in order to build a heap to commemorate this covenant. And what they decided on is that neither of them will pass over into each other's land, the land marked by this heap of stones, to harm one another. And so with this new covenant, Laban left the next morning after kissing his children and his grandchildren and blessing them. So just like the last chapter, we're going to summarize and try and blast through in chapter 32, which talks about Jacob being fearful of coming across his younger brother, who's now in charge of the land where he came from, Esau. So Jacob sent messages before him to reach his brother Esau. And these messages were sent to show Esau that Jacob was coming as his servant and as someone willing to come to serve the ruler of the land and to find favor with his brother Esau. However, the messengers, the people that delivered the message, returned to Jacob and told him that Esau was on his way to him, bringing 400 men with him. Jacob, hearing this news, was greatly distressed and afraid. He then decided to divide all his people and his flocks into 2 separate camps, so that if one of them would be attacked by Esau and these men, the other camp could escape and survive. Then we have from verse 9 to 13 a prayer that Jacob prays to God, asking for him to keep him safe, his family safe, to bless him, to not allow harm to befall him from the hands of his brother Esau. And then from verse 13, we see here that Jacob decides to try and win over Esau's affection by sending forth all his flocks, all his herds, his livelihood in a way, ahead of him and the people that he was with, his own campsite, so that they would come across Esau first, and they would tell him that these were gifts from his brother Jacob to show that he was willing to be his servant, to show servitude towards Esau, and to gain favor from Esau. Following on from verse 22, we have Jacob sending away all of his servants and his family, all of the people, so that he might be left alone. And then it states that he wrestles with a man all night until the break of day. The man asked after they wrestled, "What is your name?" And Jacob told him his name. And then the man said this, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob says that he has come face to face with God. Now at the start of chapter 33, we have Esau finally arriving with his 400 men to where Jacob is. Jacob then gathers his family around him, then stands in front of them and bows down to Esau 7 times as Esau heads towards him. And in verse 4 it says, "But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept." And Esau asked, "Who is it that you are with?" Jacob then tells him that this is his family, that they are the children of whom God has graced to his servant, as in his servant, as in the servant of Esau, that Jacob is his servant. Esau then asked, "What was it with all the flocks and all the gifts that you sent out in front of yourself?" Jacob then responds saying that these were meant to be gifts to gain favor with him. Esau says, I do not need these things, and that your wealth should be your own. But then Jacob demands and asks him to receive these gifts in order to have the blessing from Esau and to have favor with him. And so then Esau took them. Now for some reason, even though Jacob was wrong to fear his brother, and that Esau had shown in all of his actions and all of his words that he loved his brother, and he didn't show any kind of course that he was going to harm him in any way, Jacob then goes about saying to his brother to leave him and his family and his servants and go on ahead of him, so they might travel at different speeds, and that Jacob would then sojourn and meet Esau, his brother, where Esau reigned and lived. Yet, when Esau decided to do so and leave before Jacob, Jacob turned and went in a separate direction. Esau returned to Seir, and in verse 18 we see Jacob journey safely to the place of Shechem. Alright guys, chapter 34. Now this is an interesting story. about one of the daughters of Jacob. So let's get into it. This is the story of Dinah, the daughter of Leah. A man by the name of Shechem, the son of Hamor and Havit, the prince of the land, saw her. He seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." So I don't know if I need to spell it out, but Dinah was raped by the prince of the place where they were living. Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, and Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry. So we have Jacob hearing about what's happened, Hamor, the father of the rapist, coming to try and get the approval of Dinah's father, Jacob, to allow Dinah to marry his son. And then we have Jacob's sons, who, there's 11 of them, are very angry about the situation, and for fair reason. And then in verse 8 it goes on and says, Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife, and you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Ask me for a great bride price and gift, and I will give you whatever you say to me." So Hamor here is pleading with Jacob to allow Dinah to marry his son, and saying that I will give you whatever you want to allow this to happen. The sons of Jacob then responded, and they said this: "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace on us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you." So the sons of Jacob saying, if you want her hand in marriage, then every man, not just Shechem, every man in that town, in that area, needs to be circumcised. Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young man did not delay to do the thing. Shechem and his father came to the gate of the city and spoke to all of the men and said to them, "Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us, to become one people. With every male among us is circumcised, and they are circumcised." And so it happened. Every male in the area, in the town, was then circumcised. And now this is when things get interesting. We're going to read straight through from verse 25. On the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure, and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones and all their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. Wow. So we have a pretty drastic result from this horrible action that Shechem did, where the sons of Jacob, Simon and Levi, tricked Hamor and Shechem to circumcise all the men, to allow them to be weak enough so they can go in and just wipe them all out, kill them all, kill all of the men, and then take all of their possessions and their families as their own. When Jacob heard of this, he said to Simon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed." But then they said to Jacob their father, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" Following on from this slaughter, we have in chapter 25, God says and speaks to Jacob to move on from that area and travel to the land of Bethel. And in verse 5, it says that as they journeyed through different lands and areas, God sent terror to the neighboring cities and areas around them to give them protection as they moved. And once Jacob had arrived, he built an altar to God and named the area El Bethel. God then appeared to Jacob again. And in verse 10, this is what it says. Your name is Jacob. No longer shall your name be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. So we had the man, God, that was wrestling Jacob, call him Israel. But now this is officially God renaming Jacob to Israel. So now his name is Israel. Then in the following verse, we have the same covenant that was given to Abraham and Isaac, given again to Jacob, who's now Israel. And that covenant is to be fruitful and multiply, that nations and kings shall come from you and your body, and that I will give the land to your offsprings after you. Now at the end of chapter 35, we have them journeying on from Bethel. And then while they are journeying, Rachel goes into labor again. But unfortunately, this is a hard labor. And in verse 18, it says this. And her soul was departing, for she was dying. She called the name of her son Ben-Anoi, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died. So here we have the love of Israel's life, Rachel dying in childbirth to their newest son, Benjamin. And now Jacob has 12 sons. Sorry, Israel. And at the very end, we have Jacob journeying to Mamre to meet for the last time his father, Isaac. Isaac also died at 180 years old. And then his two sons, Esau and Jacob, buried him. So guys, we ripped through a huge part of Genesis just then, a few chapters, some really interesting stories. All the time, Jacob, who's now Israel, is walking hand to hand with God, just like we've seen with Abraham and Isaac. I really hope you liked this video. I hope you learnt a few more stories of the Bible. Please like and subscribe if you like this content so you can see more videos and you can keep up to date. And I'll see you in the future. Bye for now. God bless.